There are many stories and legends surrounding America's earliest days, and sadly, many of them are just that, stories. But there is a legend about a little girl and her life on the prairie that is thought to be as close to the truth as you can get. The story comes to us through the eyes of writer Maurice Thompson, who brought the narrative to light in the earliest days of the last century. The story happened just 3 years after the Declaration of Independence, but in a place about as far away from Philadelphia as you could get at the time, on the banks of the Wabash, in what would become the Indiana Territory. It was February of 1779. The mighty Wabash was swelled by flooding, its waters waist-deep in the lands on the western side. Overlooking the river and nearly surrounded by it was a British fort, a fort put there to keep the river open to traffic for the movement of goods in that far-flung part of the British Empire. The little city surrounding the fort was of French origin, named Vincennes. It had been started 4 decades earlier by fur trappers and was named for one of them. Its inhabitants were indeed on the fringe of civilization. Vincennes was just about as far as you could go in 1779 without stepping off the edge of the map. The tiny town, with a population of about 700, already had some local celebrities. Among them, Father Gibault, a French Jesuit missionary who would become a patriot in the growing American cause, and Francis Vigo, an Italian-born merchant who would later be an important spy when attempts were made to dislodge the British from the fort. In 1778, a young Virginian named George Rogers Clark, with a band of 170 men, had gone to the only community on the map farther west than Vincennes. It was an American native settlement with 7,000 people. Clark not only hoped to get control of the region away from the French and the British, but to cement better relations on the fringe of America with the natives. Trader Francis Vigo met with him and told him there was a little French village, Vincennes, on his way back to Virginia, and that he ought to stop there, because it had a British fort. Clark decided to march his men through miles of flooded plains to Vincennes and to rid the region of the British. He first sent in a few men looking like trappers to find out what was going on. They met with Father Gibault, who became a fan of Clark's ideas and wanted to help. Gibault was the parish priest and knew just about everyone, at least among the French-speaking, non-British population. He began to spread the word that if strangers came into the camp, they would be friends, and the locals should help them. A young woman, an orphan living in poverty, heard the story and became wrapped up in it, and she combined her personal hopes for freedom and a better life to the American cause. She pledged her loyalty to Father Gibault. When Clark's men, with the help of sympathetic locals, entered the fort in February of 1779, they saw a young woman raising a homemade symbol of the American cause. Eventually, the British surrendered, and the newly captured fort was renamed Fort Patrick Henry. Word spread among the native peoples that the British weren't as powerful as they looked, and that the American cause might be one to join. The young woman who joined the rebel cause and raised a flag over the fort was Alice Rousselon. The specter of her raising that homemade flag became a symbol of liberty on the prairie. When the war was over, Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams went to Paris to hammer out a treaty with the British, and they were quick to remind the Brits that America now held all the land west of the original 13 colonies, and that the British had lost their claims when the fort at Vincennes had surrendered. Today, George Rogers Clark and his victory in the only battle of the Revolution not fought in the original 13 colonies is remembered with the largest monument to a single American outside of Washington, D.C., the George Rogers Clark Memorial. Today, few remember Alice of Old Vincennes. Most of the students at the local high school, which names its teams the Alices, don't even know the story. Alice of Old Vincennes, another lost page in American history. I'm Dennis Daly.